Good morning. You had a packed 21 hours, 15 videos worth of catching up to do, covering everything from NVIDIA's $500 billion financing machine and the future of AI infrastructure, to Steam malware arrests, open weights model benchmarks, battery breakthroughs, and China's EV dominance. Grab a coffee, because there's a lot of good stuff in here. Let's start with the biggest macro story of the last day, and honestly one of the more intellectually satisfying explainers you'll find on the AI investment landscape right now. Nate Jones from AI News and Strategy Daily put out a really considered piece on what NVIDIA's $500 billion partnership announcement actually means, and he came in with a clear thesis and a lot of supporting data. His framing device is elegant. Every transformative technology requires two inventions. First, the machine itself. Second, the financial architecture that can fund mass deployment. The railroad didn't change America because someone built a locomotive. It changed America because someone invented land grants, railroad bonds, underwriting syndicates, and the ability to pull European capital into present-day track laying. NVIDIA's announcement this week, he argues, is the second invention for AI. So what actually happened? NVIDIA signed memoranda of understanding with Apollo, BlackRock, Blackstone, Brookfield, Goldman Sachs, and KKR, 6 of the world's largest capital pools, targeting over $500 billion in third-party capital for AI infrastructure. And Nate is immediately precise about this. NVIDIA did not raise $500 billion. There is no bank account. These are MOUs, not closed deals. What matters is that 6 of the most sophisticated institutional capital allocators on the planet have decided AI compute is something they know how to finance. That's new. But here's where he gets really interesting: the circular money problem. He maps the current investment loop carefully. Microsoft invests in OpenAI, OpenAI buys Microsoft Compute. NVIDIA invests in CoreWeave, CoreWeave borrows to buy NVIDIA chips, OpenAI reserves capacity from CoreWeave, and NVIDIA has agreed under certain conditions to buy unused CoreWeave capacity. Microsoft booked $24 billion in fiscal 2026 revenue from OpenAI against a $37 billion total AI run rate it advertises, meaning a very large fraction of Microsoft's headline AI number is one customer that Microsoft also invests in. His phrase for it: "You're looking at the same money moving around in a circle, making every company look richer on the way through." So is there real external demand? This is where he introduces exponential views methodology as the right way to cut through circular revenue. You count the outside customer dollar exactly once. Their numbers put generative AI at $110 billion in trailing 12-month revenue, with the most recent month running at an annualized pace above $175 billion. Anthropic's run rate crossed $47 billion in May. There are insider rumors, which he flags explicitly as unverified, that Anthropic will cross $100 billion run rate before its IPO. He says watch the S1 for the real story. On spending distribution, the median firm spent about $12 per employee on AI. The top 1% of firms spent $7,400. He reads this as a market spreading at different speeds, not a market with no real customers. On the infrastructure side, CoreWeave's backlog has passed roughly $100 billion, with quarterly revenue more than doubling year over year. He acknowledges backlog isn't revenue, but customers don't reserve $100 billion of compute because nobody wants it. And in March, CoreWeave closed an $8.5 billion loan facility, rated A3 by Moody's, described as the first investment-grade financing secured by high-performance computing infrastructure. GPU-backed debt is being rated and bought. He also addresses the stranded asset argument directly with a surprising data point. An A100 chip from 2020 is still generating revenue under contracts running to 2029, 9 years after launch, versus a commonly assumed 3 to 5 year GPU life. That makes the financing somewhat safer than bubble critics assume. On the SEC side, staff confirmed in July that data center securitizations are not asset-backed securities under the Exchange Act, meaning post-2008 risk retention rules don't apply. Nate flags this with personal alarm, noting he lived through 2008, but then carefully distinguishes. This is staff confirming the rule never anticipated this type of deal, not a rule being repealed. He expects securitization to follow. He's also upfront about the risks he can name. Capital concentration. The same small group of chip companies, clouds, model labs, and hyperscalers serve simultaneously as customers, suppliers, lenders, and investors. A single large customer default propagates across multiple companies at once. Incentive misalignment. NVIDIA gets paid when equipment sells, cloud operators benefit from announcing large backlogs, financial firms collect fees before projects perform. If everyone gets paid early and someone else holds long-term risk, underwriting quality deteriorates fast. On employment, he presents a sobering stat. Workers aged 22 to 25 in highly AI-exposed occupations are about 19% below trend employment. But this is driven by reduced hiring, not firing, and critically, the divergence started before ChatGPT, making causation hard to establish. His overall read: most ordinary businesses are augmenting people, not replacing them, because they can't confidently put a dollar on the line and replace a person with a model. His closing argument is the railroad analogy made explicit. The Panic of 1873 was real, defaults were real, investors lost real money, and the economy kept the railroad. His 3 questions for any future AI financing announcement: is there a firm customer contract? How concentrated is the revenue? Can the GPUs earn enough over the life of the debt after costs? And who loses money first if the forecast is wrong? Really worth the full watch if you haven't caught it. Staying in AI territory, the AI Daily Brief put out one of its more practically useful episodes, anchored around what the host is calling the AI deputization audit, a structured framework for figuring out which parts of your work you should actually hand off to AI agents. But he opened with a solid news sweep first. Google released Gemini 3.7 Flash. Artificial analysis clocked it at 340 tokens per second, which the host called an entirely different category than anything else, more than twice the speed of GPT 5.6 Luna. Google also improved their DeepSWE coding score from 48.6 to 65.3% versus the prior version and cut prices in half. The positioning problem, though, is real. At 40 cents per task on the artificial analysis benchmark, it sits in an uncomfortable middle, not strong enough on benchmarks to beat the cheaper tier, not cheap enough to compete on cost. The host quoted Versal's Brandon Galling arguing it actually sits on the Pareto frontier for partially synchronous coding tasks, where the speed advantage matters. You're sitting with the agent watching it work, not running long-horizon jobs. He also flags it as a meaningful upgrade for Gemini Spark specifically. OpenAI unveiled ultra-fast mode for GPT 5.6 Sol, 750 tokens per second, running on Cerebra's hardware, more than twice Gemini 3.7 Flash. API only, select customers, pricing undisclosed. Designed for real-time voice, customer support, financial research, security response, anywhere latency drives measurable value. An AlphaSense study tested several models on hundreds of financial analysis questions, parsing earnings calls, SEC filings, and news articles. GPT 5.6 Sol beat Kimi K3, 13% cheaper, and about 20% higher quality score. Gemma 4 and Inkling matched GLM 5.2 quality at less than 1/5 the cost. The standout negative result: Opus 5 delivered lower quality than Opus 4.8 at more than 5 times the cost. AlphaSense CEO Jack Coco's keyline: some of the more expensive models ended up less costly because they were more efficient in token use. The host underscores this hard for enterprise buyers: stop measuring cost per token, measure cost per useful output. On the OpenAI personnel front, Chief Revenue Officer Denise Dresser is departing after 9 months, replaced by Dolly Rogic, former president and COO of Wiz. This follows by days the departure of former COO Brad Lightcap, and Jiggy Simo left in July citing health concerns. The host is deliberately cautious. 9 times out of 10, Occam's razor is personal reasons, but acknowledges a pattern has accumulated, and the IPO has been pushed to next year, giving OpenAI time to construct a new narrative. Now for the main event, the deputization audit. The underlying premise is that the AI bottleneck has shifted from capability to context. Models don't know how you work, your formats, your history, your accounts. 2 new tools address this directly. Grokbot's Teach a Task lets you press a record button and demonstrate a browser workflow, which the bot then saves and can repeat. ChatGPT's computer history watches everything you do across apps and builds context passively, recording interaction events, not screenshots, which the host notes is a meaningful privacy distinction from the Microsoft recall controversy. He walks through the 5 criteria scoring framework carefully. You take inventory of recurring processes, then score each 1 0 to 2 on 5 dimensions. First, frequency times time, is it worth automating? Second, teachability, can you demo it in one session? Third, checkability, can you verify the output with a quick glance? Fourth, stakes, how bad is a mistake? Fifth, personal indispensability, does it actually need to be you? Total score determines the category. 8 to 10, deputize, hand it over and spot check. 4 to 7, duet, AI does part, you stay involved. 0 to 3, defend, keep it yourself. Step 4 is naming the specific blocker for anything in duet or defend. He identifies 2 blockers these new tools may now solve. Work happening on vendor portals with no API, computer use agents can click through them now, and processes that are hard to explain but easy to show, Teach a Task handles that. Blockers these tools don't solve. Work requiring taste or judgment, irreversible high-stakes decisions, work that depends on human relationships. And a new blocker they may add. If privacy is already a concern, recording your screen creates a new attack surface. Early Grokbot user feedback was mixed. Advanced users found the lack of folder control and model choice frustrating. But John O'Neill, who owns a plumbing company with 0 engineers, went from 0 to automated dispatch and office chores in 24 hours. The chief of staff pattern is getting popular. Spin up individual bots per task. Interact only through a central coordinating bot. Matt Van Horn calls Inbox and Slack tracking the universal starter job and says it now takes about a minute to set up. The full audit framework will be posted at Abrief, AI. Speaking of AI tools, there was a sharp and technically precise video from DIY Smart Code on Alibaba's new Qwen 3.827b. A dense open weights model released under Apache 2 that's generating real interest among developers who want local inference without paying per token. The presenter's tone throughout was refreshingly skeptical. He clearly ran the hardware himself and wanted to cut through the marketing framing. Let's get into what he found. Architecture first. This is a 27 billion parameter dense model across 64 layers with a clever hybrid attention mechanism. 3 blocks of gated delta linear attention for every 1 block of full standard attention. The practical effect is that compute cost stays linear rather than quadratic, while preserving a native 262,000 token context window. With YoRN extension enabled, you can push that to 1 million tokens, but there's an important operational caveat he flags. Open source frameworks implement static YoRN with a constant scaling factor, which hurts performance on shorter inputs. Only enable it when you actually need long context. The model launched simultaneously on vLLM, SG-Lang, Unsloth, Alama, and Llama. CPP, broad deployment breadth from day 1. Anyone who pulled unquantized FP16 weights on release night saw system memory spike past 50 gigabytes, which the presenter frames as a real operational concern. On developer controls, the model has a reasoning effort parameter, low, medium, or extra high, that you pass per request. He flags a non-obvious trap here. In multi-turn agent loops, lowering reasoning effort to speed up individual turns can backfire. Shallow thinking produces failed tool calls and retry cycles that cost more total tokens and wall clock time than just letting it think deeply on turn 1. He says most people miss this. Benchmarks. On SWE Bench Pro, Qwen 3.8 scores 61.7%, up from a prior 53.5%, beating Claude Opus 4.6 Max at 53.4%. The presenter immediately calls out the cherry pick. Alibaba's comparison sheet never mentions Opus 5, which scores 79.2% on the same leaderboard, 17 points ahead. That omission was deliberate. On DeepSWE, the model jumped from 13.3% to 42.2%, more than a 3-fold improvement. Terminal Bench 2.1 at 73%, OS World at 84.3%. His local hardware demo is where it gets interesting. He ran it on an AMD Radeon RX 7900 XTX with 24 GB VRAM, a Ryzen 9 9950X, and 64 GB DDR5. The task: write a production-grade, thread-safe sliding window rate limiter with per-key locking, background stale memory eviction, and an 8-stage concurrent test suite. Result: 54.2 tokens per second. All 8 unit tests passed first attempt with no race conditions. He was genuinely impressed. On the hardware economics, unquantized FP16 needs over 50 GB VRAM, server territory. Unsloth's 4-bit dynamic GGUF drops that to 17 to 19 GB, landing comfortably on a single 24 GB RTX 4090, RTX 5090, RX 7900 XTX, or 24 GB Apple Silicon Mac, with zero marginal API cost. A 16 GB card like the RTX 5080 forces RAM spill and drops to about 3 tokens per second, largely unusable for real workflows, so wait for a smaller quantization if that's your situation. Bottom line from the presenter: if you have 24 GB VRAM and do routine refactoring or run agent loops, this is worth switching to for cost reasons. If you need frontier-grade reasoning on complex tasks, Opus 5 is still 17 points ahead on SWE Bench Pro and remains the better choice. On a very different note, David Bombal sat down with Jen Ellis, former CISA director and now CEO of RSAC, for what turned into one of the more intellectually provocative cybersecurity conversations you'll hear this year. Jen's central argument is blunt: we don't have a cybersecurity problem, we have a software quality problem. Her reasoning is tight. The industry glorifies threat actors, Fancy Bear, Cozy Bear, Midnight Blizzard, with dramatic names that make attackers sound sophisticated. She wants us to call them things like dirty scumbag and weak weasel. More importantly, the industry spends enormous energy blaming victims for failing to patch or failing to use multi-factor authentication, while almost never holding vendors accountable for shipping defective products in the first place. She is particularly indignant about the Unitronics water utility attacks. Systems were breached because Unitronics shipped products with default passwords of roughly 11,111. The commenters immediately blamed the operators for not changing the defaults. Her response: why doesn't the vendor just force a password change on first use? Why does anyone ship a product where insecurity is the path of least resistance? She explicitly invokes Ralph Nader's 1965 book Unsafe at Any Speed, which reframed the auto safety debate from blaming the nut behind the wheel to holding manufacturers accountable for design defects. She says we're still blaming the nut behind the keyboard. Even her word choice matters. She wants vulnerability replaced with defect, the same language used for physical product recalls. The most exploitable vulnerabilities aren't exotic. They're memory safety violations, SQL injection, cross-site scripting, directory traversal. She calls these the rookie stuff. Languages like C and C++ create memory safety risks by design. Rust is offered as a memory-safe alternative. AI, she argues, could help find and fix flaws in legacy code at scale. On the AI acceleration problem, the zero-day clock has compressed from years and months to days and hours. She says it could soon go negative, exploitation happening before defenders are even aware. And just the day before the interview, there were reports of AI agents attempting to socially engineer GitHub staff to insert a malicious package into an open-source library. Agents are already going rogue in ways human operators didn't intend. She's direct about the need for regulation, noting that rational executives will prioritize time to market over security if that's what maximizes profit. She's skeptical of the current U.S. approach, ad hoc, voluntary, applying only to frontier labs. She's more optimistic about the EU Cyber Resilience Act because it actually holds vendors accountable for insecure products, aligning with the Secure by Design principles CISA championed under her tenure. The Secure by Design pledge, launched at RSA 2024, started with about 70 companies committing to 7 key areas, including implementing MFA, removing default passwords, and publishing a memory safety roadmap. It ultimately attracted thousands of signatories. She says the standards are published on CISA.gov. Her personal backstory is remarkable. 26 years in uniform, among the 10th graduating class of women at West Point when women were 9% of the cadet corps, executive assistant to Condoleezza Rice post 9/11, then NSA's Tailored Access Operations, the elite hacking unit, then head of counterterrorism at the White House during the rise of ISIS, then Morgan Stanley, then CISA director. The 9/11 Commission quote she carries everywhere from the vice chairman. It was a failure of policy, a failure of management, a failure of capability, but above all, a failure of imagination. She says that hit her like a lightning bolt, and she spent her career trying to develop and encourage the same imagination in cybersecurity practitioners. The cybersecurity theme continues, but from a very different angle. Bellular News had a genuinely alarming breakdown of organized criminal exploitation of Steam. And unlike a lot of gaming security stories, this one has an FBI arrest, forensic details, and some structural observations about why this problem is getting worse, not better. The headline numbers: 8,000 infected devices, 80 drained crypto wallets, at least $220,000 stolen. The presenter opens by emphasizing this is relevant to all Steam users, not just crypto holders. Malware is malware. The thread traces back to a pattern that emerged in 2025. Small, obscure games sitting on Steam that contained hidden malware payloads, or store pages quietly edited after Valve's initial approval to include suspicious links. One attack specifically targeted a streamer named Rastaland TV, stealing $32,000 in cancer treatment fundraising donations. The FBI's Seattle office, chosen because Valve is based in Washington state, put out a public call for information in March 2026. By mid-July, they made their first arrest: Zaire Dontivius Zamarian Wilkins, 21, from North Lauderdale, Florida. The criminal complaint references games identified in 2025. Wilkins allegedly paid someone to develop the malware and worked with a group to market the tiny games to targets identified as holding large crypto wallets. The money was laundered through Bitcoin into over 150 digital gift cards, including Uber Eats orders. A subpoena to Uber revealed over 500 food deliveries to his home and university. The presenter delivers this with dry humor. His takeaway orders are what got him got. Beyond the malware games, Kaspersky issued a warning about malicious wallpapers on Wallpaper Engine's workshop. Wallpaper Engine is consistently in Steam's top 10 by daily active users, and because it can run animated, application-like wallpapers, it can execute background processes. Kaspersky found wallpapers with thousands to tens of thousands of downloads that appeared to function normally. One even launched an embedded desktop game, while in the background deploying the Darkcomet backdoor and harvesting Steam session tokens. The biggest story in this video, though, is Mecha Chameleon, described as one of the biggest games of 2026 with 15 million players. On July 15th, a workshop map called Laser Tag Neon was uploaded. Users reported command prompt windows flashing briefly when loading it. Analysis showed the map contained an Unreal Engine 5 blueprint, a visual scripting tool that, after an obfuscated chain, reached out to an external server to download a remote access Trojan giving full PC control to the attacker. The map was live for 10 days before being patched on July 25th. If you didn't download and play that specific map before July 25th, you're not at risk. Separately, a systems engineer at the Mecha Chameleon development team had their testing PC infected, which gave an attacker access to bypass Discord two-factor authentication, take over server admin permissions, and ban all official staff from the official Discord. Fake admins then posted fake security warnings with malicious download links, a particularly cruel inversion. The developers reclaimed the server by July 26th. The presenter's structural argument is sharp. Small indie dev teams go viral with millions of players faster than they can build cybersecurity infrastructure. They're high-value, low-defense targets. Valve is structurally averse to expanding headcount, so defensive action consistently lags attacks. His frustration is clear. A lot of the risk just gets offloaded to you. His practical advice: stick to workshop content from uploaders with established track records. Never follow a security warning inside Discord or Steam that includes an external download link. And if a map causes a command prompt window to flash during loading, stop immediately, delete it, run scans. Shifting gears to something a bit more personal and scientific. TED published a talk from neuroscientist Lisa Monteggia. That's one of the clearer, more carefully argued explanations of what we actually know about depression and why it may not be what most people think. She opens with a simple framing. When she tells people she studies antidepressants, they ask, how do they work? And the honest answer is that we don't fully know. The popular narrative depression equals low serotonin. Antidepressants work by correcting that imbalance is, she argues, fundamentally incomplete. Here's the first challenge to that story. When you actually look at depressed individuals, many of them don't have decreased serotonin. They have normal levels. The measurable serotonin deficit that justified the imbalance narrative was, in her words, not really true. She is careful to immediately reassure the audience that SSRIs remain critically important and life-saving for many people. Anyone currently on one should keep taking it. But she highlights a key paradox that the serotonin story can't explain. SSRIs raise serotonin almost immediately, yet take weeks to produce antidepressant effects. If the mechanism were simply correcting a deficit, the effect should be rapid. This is where ketamine enters the picture, and where Monteggia's 15-plus years of research become the lens for a different understanding entirely. Ketamine was flagged as an antidepressant through a serendipitous clinical observation in a study that had nothing to do with depression. Participants who happened to be depressed showed rapid antidepressant effects within hours. Before this finding, researchers didn't believe antidepressant effects that fast were even biologically possible. Ketamine's mechanism is completely different from SSRIs. It doesn't touch serotonin at all. It targets glutamate, the primary driver of fast communication in the brain. And here's the counterintuitive part. It works by blocking glutamate, not activating it. By blocking glutamate transmission, ketamine actually strengthens specific synaptic connections in the brain. She calls this synaptic plasticity, the brain's ability to adapt and reinforce its own connections. That plasticity, she argues, is what drives the antidepressant effect. She frames three transformative implications. First, depression isn't a chemical imbalance to be corrected. The "you are broken and missing a key ingredient" narrative is wrong. Second, antidepressants don't have to take weeks. Hours-long responses are now demonstrated, which matters enormously for people who have failed SSRI treatment and may have been suffering without relief for decades. Third, the brain isn't permanently damaged or stuck at a fixed deficit. It can change. Ketamine demonstrates that triggering that change is possible. Her ongoing research is focused on the window of plasticity that ketamine opens, whether patients become more receptive to therapy during that period, how brain stimulation might complement it, and how to extend the effect since ketamine's antidepressant action wanes after a few days. The patient metaphor she shares is genuinely moving. Before ketamine, that person felt trapped in a dark room with no windows and no door, because SSRIs hadn't worked. After ketamine, it didn't transform their life into a party, but it lifted the darkness enough to reveal a door, and with it, hope. Depression affects over 280 million people globally and is the leading cause of disability in the United States. This research, she argues with quiet urgency, points toward treatments that are better, faster, and more widely applicable. On a more hands-on note, Alex Ziskind put out a really enjoyable tutorial that's equal parts Replit demo and practical proof of concept. He built a web app live that answers the question, what computer should I buy to run AI locally? Pulling from his own benchmark data across dozens of tested devices. Alex's framing is candid from the start. He has 25 years of software development experience, and he still deliberately delegates app building to AI agents because the opportunity cost of hand-coding one-off projects is too high right now. He frames that as a professional judgment, not a shortcut. The core problem he's solving. He's tested an enormous range of hardware on his channel: max NVIDIA GPUs, gaming laptops, mini PCs, 10-storent dev boards, workstation cards. But all that benchmark data is scattered across individual videos and personal spreadsheets with no centralized, queryable form. The goal is a web app where someone enters their desired model, budget, and machine type, and gets hardware recommendations grounded in real benchmark data. He opens by trying to pull structured data from his old YouTube videos using AI, which turns out messier than expected. Some videos specify the model but not the quantization. He ends up with what he calls dirty, nasty data. His prompt strategy is a two-step trick he swears by. Have the AI create a plan first, then have that plan generate the implementation prompt. Crucially, he includes a specific instruction. Do not invent benchmark numbers. If data is missing, clearly label it as unavailable. He acknowledges he doesn't fully trust AI to honor that constraint, so he designs the system with the expectation he'll manually validate and load real data later. In Replit, he selects the website project type, visibly resisting the temptation to explore 3D game mode, pastes his generated prompt, and uses plan mode first to let the agent ask clarifying questions. The agent suggests a front-end-only static app since the dataset is small, but ends up building a database backend anyway. The database shows 29 MB used, 15 benchmark rows, and a hardware table. Hardware in the table includes the DGX Spark at 128 GB, Mac Mini M4 Pro at 64 GB, Tenstorrent Wormhole N300 at 128 GB, AMD 7900 XTX at 32 GB, RTX 5090 at 32 GB. Before iterating on features, he asks the agent to review the app as a skeptical local AI user and identify the 5 biggest problems with recommendation accuracy and ease of use, without changing anything yet. He hits his monthly free quota limit mid-review and upgrades to Replit Core on camera. The parallel subagent moment is what he highlights most. When addressing the top 2 issues simultaneously, Replit splits into multiple agents working in parallel, with the agent narrating, "I can work on both in parallel." He calls this out as a notably impressive capability. The automated browser testing feature is genuinely delightful. Replit opens an actual visible browser in the sidebar, clicks through the app, runs 11 scenarios, and comes back clean. The admin panel was added automatically, allowing direct import of real benchmark data. Total infrastructure cost at publish time, $3.41. He publishes it to a Replit domain, adds a feedback widget, and checks mobile responsiveness. It holds up on an iPhone 14 Pro Max simulation. The full app includes dark mode, a recommendation engine, comparison view, and mobile responsive layout. Build time, roughly 30 to 40 minutes of active session. And while we're in hardware territory, Explaining Computers put out his characteristic methodical deep dive on the Orange Pi Zero 3W. And the surprise NVMe result at the end genuinely made the video worth watching. Christopher paid £54.85 plus taxes for the 4GB model. At time of recording, AliExpress was listing it at $85.27 for 4GB and $170.96 for 12GB. The board launched in April 2026 and shares the same mounting hole pattern as a Raspberry Pi Zero 2W, but is slightly wider at 65x32 versus 65x30. The silicon is an all-winner A733 SoC with 2 ARM Cortex-A76 performance cores at up to 2, 0 GHz, and 6 Cortex-A55 efficiency cores at up to 1, 8 GHz, 8 cores total, plus an Imagination PowerVR GPU, a 3 TOPS NPU, and an Alibaba RISC-V microcontroller. Wi-Fi 6 and Bluetooth 5.4 are on board via a dedicated module with an external antenna connector. Connectivity is impressive for this form factor. Along the main edge, one USB-C for USB 2 OTG and power, a second USB-C delivering USB 3 data and DisplayPort alt mode at 4K/60 FPS, plus a mini HDMI also at 4K/60 FPS, meaning it can drive 2 independent displays simultaneously, useful for digital signage. The underside has a microSD slot, 2 MIPI CSI camera connectors, a MIPI DSI display connector, a fan connector, and, crucially, an FPC connector providing single-lane PCIe 3. On software, the Ubuntu 22.04 image felt responsive, but showed no GPU hardware acceleration. WebGL Aquarium at 500 fish hit only 8 to 9 frames per second, and YouTube at 1080p dropped frames noticeably. He switched to Debian 11, the only image the manual claims has GPU support, and found that Chromium handles 1080p YouTube without dropped frames, but verified there is actually no GPU hardware acceleration in that image either. Chromium simply handles software-rendered video better than Firefox. He flagged that Debian 11 is end-of-life, with support ending within weeks of publication. On benchmarks, microSD at 65.74 MB/s CPU sysbench in 2.7 seconds, slightly edging the QB-A7S at 2.84 seconds, with the Raspberry Pi 5 slightly faster at 2.43 seconds and the Pi 4 slower at 3.59 seconds. Idle power around 3.1 to 3.2 watts, rising to 6.5 to 6.6 watts under sustained load. Temperature held in the high 50s Celsius under full load, which he called impressive for the form factor. The NVMe ending. He connected a Raspberry Pi NVMe SSD adapter to the FPC PCIe interface, fully expecting it not to work, since Orange Pi doesn't document or claim NVMe support. It worked. LSPCI showed the drive, LSBLK showed the NVMe device. Speed test returned 581 MB/s. He called it very respectable for a single-lane PCIe 3 interface on a low-cost board where NVMe isn't officially supported. If you're considering this board and want NVMe storage, feel confident trying it. It works. Let's take a detour into something that's part pure algorithmic craft and part excellent learning advice. Coding Jesus brought on Ishan, a self-taught engineer in the top 0.05% of Leetcode users who has solved approximately 3,700 of the platform's roughly 4,000 problems, with about 300 to go, which he hopes to finish by year's end. Ishan's backstory is genuinely motivating. He started not knowing what a hash map was and spent multiple days unable to solve two-sum. He made a public post saying he'd solve every problem on the platform, which nobody took seriously. He's now done it with about 7.5% left to go. The live problem is a hard one. Given a list of numbers and two types of queries, point updates and range queries asking for the maximum sum of any non-adjacent subsequence, compute the answer to each query modulo 1,000,000,007. Constraints are 50,000 elements and 50,000 queries. Ishan identifies it immediately as a segment tree problem. He explains the motivation clearly. Naive approach, walk the full array per query, giving OQ times n too slow. Segment tree, OQ times log n. The structure is a binary tree where each node holds precomputed data about a contiguous range, with the root covering the full array and leaf nodes representing individual elements. Total nodes, at most 2n, proven via geometric series. Tree height, log n because you have at each level. Any range query can be decomposed into at most 4 times log n nodes via DFS traversal. Updates walk down to the leaf and back up, each taking log n time. He uses a 4n memory allocation as a padding trick to avoid out-of-bounds issues when n is not a power of 2. The clever part is how he represents each node. Rather than a single value, each segment tree node stores a tuple of 4 numbers covering different endpoint constraints. MaxLR, both endpoints used, MaxL, left used, right not, MaxR, right used, left not, and MX, neither endpoint used. He names the last one MX specifically to avoid a Python naming conflict with the built-in max function. The merge function combines left and right child tuples into a parent by enumerating all valid non-adjacent combinations, accounting for the rule that if the rightmost element of the left half is used, the leftmost of the right half cannot be. He submits. It passes all test cases in approximately 2.8 seconds. Both Ishan and the host express genuine surprise that it worked first try. The Q&A section has some of the most concrete Leetcode advice I've heard. 3 key points. First, don't just move on after solving a problem, read other people's solutions in the discussion tab every time, even when you solved it cleanly. When he started, he'd try the alternate approach too. Seeing multiple solutions per problem multiplies the learning. Second, if you looked up a solution, recoding it isn't enough. Spend time identifying the specific reasoning steps you missed that would have led you there independently. Most Leetcode problems share fundamental first principles. Finding your reasoning gap is where the real growth is. Third, practice by topic in focused blocks. 2 weeks of nothing but binary search, until you're tired of it. Doing 2,000 random problems without intentionality is far less effective than topic saturation that builds recognizable mental patterns. For a bit of retro tech nostalgia, Random Frank resurrected his 11-year-old Alienware Alpha R1 Steam machine from 2015, which is timely given that Valve just started shipping a new Steam machine in 2026. He pulled the Alpha out of the closet and found it completely dead, a blinking yellow light that turned out to be an extremely well-documented failure. Hundreds of forum threads, one fix, replaced the CMOS battery. He found only one unit left in stock, swapped it, and the machine came back to life. Specs: Intel Core i7-4785T, NVIDIA GTX 860M with just 2 GB VRAM, 8 GB DDR3 RAM, and a 128 GB SSD. He sums it up perfectly. They just put a 2014 laptop in this thing. Physical form factor is impressive, 8 x 8 inches, 2.25 inches tall, comparable in size to the PS4, which was the top-selling console at the time. Launch price ranged from $450 to $800. He paid around $700 secondhand in 2016. Benchmark testing in 2026 without any upgrades. Valorant hit 72 FPS at 1080p low, fine. Overwatch 2 hit 64 FPS at 1080p low, passes. Skyrim hit 53 FPS at medium settings, which he called better than expected. GTA V averaged 51 FPS at normal settings. CS2 only managed 47 FPS even at low, which surprised him. Battlefield 5 ran at 35 FPS at 1080p low, which he notes is roughly on par with consoles of that era running at 900p trying to hit 30. Red Dead Redemption 2 at 900p with FSR performance enabled achieved about 28 FPS, not enjoyable. Cyberpunk 2077 at 720p low with FSR crashed frequently and hit 23 FPS, not worth the time downloading. 3 main killers for more testing. The 2 GB VRAM limit meant most modern games wouldn't launch at all, outdated DirectX and incompatible drivers, and the 128 GB SSD limiting him to 2 installed games at a time. Some modern games exceed 128 GB by themselves. On 3D Mark Time Spy, he landed in the bottom third percentile. His closing analysis explains why the original Steam machine failed commercially. The hardware was underpowered, hitting around 900p in practice at its best. The price was too high relative to consoles. And most damningly, SteamOS was only compatible with roughly 8% of the full Steam library at launch, because Linux compatibility was limited and Proton didn't exist yet. Most users just installed Windows 10, as he did. The new 2026 Steam machine claims about 80% compatibility via Proton, a completely different proposition. He's cautiously skeptical about whether that's enough to make the new one succeed, but acknowledges the library problem has been fundamentally solved. He's also being very dry about it. The future's not looking too bright for the current one either. On a very different kind of community politics note, Brian Lunjuk from the Lunjuk Journal put out a characteristically pointed video about the Python Software Foundation's latest board of directors candidates, which he frames as a continuation of what he sees as a long pattern of political activism dominating the organization's leadership pipeline. Lunjuk is not presenting this neutrally. He's openly right-leaning and uses terms like leftist and woke without hedging. He gets particularly animated about candidate Georgie Kerr, a member of the Python Diversity and Inclusion Workgroup who lives in Amsterdam and mentions the city's fabulous pride celebrations in her candidate statement. He returns to that phrase multiple times for comedic effect. The 3 candidates he focuses on: Kalyan Prasad, a D&I workgroup member focused on code of conduct and inclusivity; Georgie Kerr, the Amsterdam-based D&I workgroup member who is employed by the German government through a fellowship. Lunjuk characterizes this as Germany funding the spread of progressive values inside organizations like Python, and he finds her now running for a board seat particularly concerning. And Cecilia Tivier, nominated specifically for DEI advocacy. He uses a browser plugin he built himself, which displays nonprofit financials inline on websites, to share 2024 PSF financials, total assets of $3.3 million, revenue of $4 million, expenses of $5.7 million, executive director compensation of $145,000. The organization is spending more than it brings in. The financial detail he emphasizes most is the PSF's rejection of a $1.5 million federal government grant. The grant came with a condition that the PSF not discriminate based on race, ethnicity, or gender, which Lunjuk argues would have required them to modify DEI policies. They declined the money. He frames this as ideology over practicality in stark terms, characterizing DEI policies themselves as constituting race and gender discrimination. He references a prior suspension incident as his main example of cancel culture within the organization. A prominent Python contributor suspended for approximately 3 to 4 months for casually agreeing that a 1970s SNL sketch was funny. He acknowledges a few candidates simply want to help people learn Python, but says those candidates are unlikely to win most seats. Moving into the EV and energy space, and there were 4 videos from the Electric Viking worth covering. Let's start with the China EV market data, which Sam Evans presented with the energy of someone who's been waiting to deliver genuinely historic numbers. In July, 65% of all new vehicles sold in China were electrified new energy vehicles, the first time CAAM data has ever broken the 60% threshold. Evans stresses this milestone was predicted not to arrive until the 2030s. Total NEV sales in July were 1,561,000 units, up 23.7% year-on-year, in a month that was traditionally slow and hit by a brutal heat wave, typhoons, and flooding in multiple regions. Total vehicle sales were down overall. NEV sales still rose 24%. The BEV versus PHEV split is where Evans gets sharp. Pure battery electric vehicles hit 1,072,000 units, up 32.2%. Plug-in hybrids came in at 489,000, up only 8%. BEVs are growing 4 times faster than PHEVs in China. Evans's conclusion: the hybrid bridge narrative being promoted in Europe and Japan is being dismantled by Chinese consumers who have chosen full electrification. Meanwhile, conventional fuel vehicle domestic sales dropped 45.7% year-on-year. He calls this the death slide, nearly a halving in 12 months, in a market that sells more cars than the United States and Europe combined. The export surge is the core story. China shipped 553,000 electric vehicles overseas in July, up 145% year-on-year, roughly 2.5 times what they exported in July the prior year. Total vehicle exports hit 1,043,000 units, the second consecutive month over 1 million. EVs now account for more than half of all Chinese vehicle exports for the second month running. Year-to-date through July, 2.9 million electric vehicles exported, up 120%. He explains why exports are the growth engine. China has built more manufacturing capacity than its home market can absorb, and that surplus is flowing into Southeast Asia, Latin America, the Middle East, Europe, and Australia. CAAM's own explanation: complete vertical supply chain from lithium processing through battery manufacturing, plus rapid software and cabin technology iteration. Evans's plain summary: they can build a better electric car cheaper than anyone else and update it twice a year. On Australia, fuel prices have hit around $4 per litre. Australian EV sales in the first 2 months of the year rose approximately 102% before oil prices spiked further. EV market share went from roughly 6% in early 2024 to 12% in February 2025. Japanese brands are being hit hard: Toyota down 28%, Nissan down 51%, Mitsubishi down 22%, Suzuki down 28%. For the first time ever, China has overtaken Japan as the #1 vehicle supplier to Australia, an outcome analysts had predicted for 2030, arriving approximately 4 years early. Still with the Electric Viking, Sam Evans had a really interesting analysis of what happened to Xiaomi's extraordinary YU7 pre-order numbers, and why record-breaking launch demand turned out not to mean what anyone thought it did. The launch was genuinely spectacular. Xiaomi reported 200,000 pre-orders in 3 minutes, 289,000 within the first hour, and 240,000 non-refundable deposits within 18 hours. Total pre-orders were estimated between 350,000 and 400,000. Wait times stretched to 60 weeks, over a year, and used YU7s were reselling at nearly $3,000 above sticker price. Evans stresses, this was for a mainstream SUV at a $35,000 US price point, not a supercar. So why is Xiaomi badly behind its 2026 target? Evans walks through the numbers. The 2026 goal is 550,000 deliveries. Through July, 7 months in, they've delivered only 216,000 vehicles, 39% of the annual goal. To hit 550,000, they'd need to average roughly 67,000 cars per month for the remaining 5 months. In July, they actually delivered about 31,000, less than half the required run rate. A significant miss is essentially certain. He traces the demand collapse precisely. In 2025, Xiaomi's problem was production capacity. They still managed to smash their 350,000 unit target and delivered 410,000 vehicles. The YU7 crossed 200,000 cumulative deliveries by February 2026, at which point the order backlog cleared. Wait times collapsed from 57 weeks to just 7 weeks. Goldman Sachs data from March 2026 showed weekly new orders had dropped to around 4,000 units. Under 20,000 per month across both models versus January, when the YU7 alone was moving nearly 38,000 per month and was the best-selling vehicle in all of China. Evans's diagnosis. The pre-orders represented 2 years of accumulated Xiaomi brand fandom, amplified by CEO Lei Jun's powerful marketing machine, all cashing in simultaneously on launch day. Once that cohort was served, underlying monthly demand proved to be a fraction of the spike. Buyers who waited have now been presented with dozens of newer, cheaper alternatives from BYD, Geely, Li Auto, and XPeng that simply didn't exist when the YU7 launched. Xiaomi's response. The Sky Nomad N90, a full-size family SUV with an extended-range petrol generator. Evans is openly skeptical extended-range vehicle sales in China are actually declining, not growing, and finds it ironic that a company positioned as China's Tesla is resorting to combustion assistance to chase volume. He also offers a product critique. The YU7 is over 5 meters long, but meaningfully smaller inside than its exterior suggests more fashion statement than practical family vehicle. The broader lesson he draws, invoking the Tesla Cybertruck comparison, is sharp. Launch day order numbers are nearly meaningless as demand signals. Over 1 million Cybertruck pre-orders, most evaporated. Real demand is what customers keep buying month after month once hype fades and competition responds. Xiaomi's 400,000-plus deliveries in year 2 and achieving EV profitability in 18 months are genuinely impressive milestones. But the YU7 story is them discovering what their true baseline demand actually is. Also from the Electric Viking, Sam Evans covered the completion of the world's largest green hydrogen plant, the NEOM project in Saudi Arabia, and framed it explicitly against the backdrop of a broader hydrogen industry in crisis. The NEOM green hydrogen project is at Oxagon on the Red Sea coast in northwestern Saudi Arabia. Total cost, $8.4 billion. Construction is complete, commissioning is underway, and commercial production is targeted for 2027. The output numbers: 600 tons of hydrogen per day, converted into up to 1.2 million tons of green ammonia annually, exported via a purpose-built jetty. The energy infrastructure powering it is staggering. A solar farm described as Manhattan-sized producing 2.2 gigawatts, plus 257 wind turbines generating 1.6 gigawatts, feeding into 2.2 gigawatts of electrolyzers described as the largest electrolyzer installation on the planet. The plant will avoid approximately 5 million tons of CO2 per year once operational. Evans explains why hydrogen is converted to ammonia rather than shipped directly. Hydrogen requires either extreme compression or cooling to minus 253 degrees Celsius. Ammonia is energy-dense, and around 20 million tons are already traded globally each year with existing port infrastructure and safety standards. He uses this to state his broader view that hydrogen will never work practically for personal vehicles, a point he makes clearly. Here's what he says most coverage misses. This project is being completed at the exact moment the broader green hydrogen industry is in crisis. Analysts counted roughly 50 publicly canceled hydrogen projects. Green hydrogen currently costs $4.50 to $6 per kilogram versus $1.50 to $2.50 for fossil-based gray hydrogen. Gigawatt-scale export projects in Canada stalled simply because there were no buyers. NEOM survived because it solved the buyer problem before construction began. Air Products signed a 30-year exclusive offtake agreement for every ton of ammonia the plant produces. That contract unlocked $6.1 billion in financing from 23 banks. Air Products is also finalizing a deal with Norway's Yara to market the ammonia globally through Yara's shipping fleet. China is already competing. Envision Energy has commissioned its own hydrogen-to-ammonia plant, starting at 300,000 tons per year and scaling to 1.5 million tons, with an offtake agreement with Japan's Marubeni. Saudi Arabia's response is to go bigger. ACWA Power has begun engineering on a second facility at Yanbu, featuring 4 gigawatts of electrolysis, double the NEOM project, targeting up to 400,000 tons of green hydrogen per year. Evans's thesis is clear. The hydrogen hype era is over. The survivors have 3 things in common: guaranteed buyers secured in advance, access to very cheap renewables, and sovereign-scale financial backing. NEOM will be the proof point for whether green hydrogen works at true industrial scale. And rounding out the Electric Vikings content, Sam Evans had a 2-story battery technology video that's worth knowing about. Both stories illustrating how dramatically energy storage has advanced in about a decade and a half. Story 1 is the McLaren P1 battery replacement. The P1 is a hypercar that cost over $1 million new, built between 2013 and 2015. Its hybrid battery cells date from 2010, making them about 16 years old now. Many of the approximately 375 cars ever produced are either running on severely degraded packs or bricked in garages. The factory replacement from McLaren costs $157,000 USD, which Evans calls crazy for what is a small battery. The original pack had just 4.72 kilowatt-hours, delivering about 6 miles of electric range, designed more for performance augmentation than EV driving. A British company called V Engineering has developed a drop-in replacement under Project Continuum, working alongside engineers from the original P1 development team. The new specs are the headline: 12.4 kilowatt-hours of capacity, the same physical dimensions as the original, and 23 kilograms lighter. That's roughly 2.6 times the energy in the same space at less weight. Evans explicitly invokes Tony Seba's exponential improvement predictions and says the McLaren story is that curve condensed into one product. The new pack uses 21,700 format NMC lithium cells built to FIA Formula E spec, with glycol cooling, and it's plug-and-play with the P1's existing electrical architecture. Commercial installations begin spring 2027, targeting the UK, Europe, and Middle East. Pricing hasn't been announced, but Evans expects it won't be cheap. His broader consumer lesson from this story: don't buy an EV with battery technology from around 2010. The degradation and obsolescence risk is real. The technology has moved so far so fast, and it's not slowing down. Story 2 is CATL's TechTrans 2 Superfast Charging Edition for light commercial vehicles. The numbers Evans leads with: 20 to 80% charge in 6 minutes and 48 seconds, 0 to 100% in 8 minutes and 56 seconds, roughly the same time as a fuel stop at a diesel pump, Q included. The enabling technology is an 8C peak charging rate. CATL claims to be the only company in the global logistics industry offering this capability. The cell's internal resistance is just 50% of the industry average, which Evans identifies as a key technical enabler. When CATL launched the original TechTrans brand in 2024, its fast charge version achieved 4C. They've doubled the charging speed in approximately 2 years. The implication is significant. Commercial transport may be reaching parity between electric and diesel for refueling time, removing one of the last practical objections to electric delivery vehicles in fleet operator calculations. That's everything from the last 21 hours, a dense mix of macro AI finance, practical AI tooling, cybersecurity, hardware, neuroscience, and a big energy transition picture. Quite a day. Catch you on the next one.